Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, long-lost listener. I hope that you are doing well. It's been at least a week since I've recorded an episode, perhaps 2 weeks. It's been a long time. So I want to talk a little bit about my thinking about the podcast and sort of my ideas moving forward. The last episode I recorded, which as of this recording has not been released, but I'll release them both in the next week or so. I talked a little bit about the idea of trying to think about how I want to do the podcast. I was finding it a bit difficult to keep motivated with my current schedule. And I have a couple options. One option is to just record and post, to stop doing any kind of editing at all. But I feel like that's not respectful to you. Certainly, I could release a podcast that's got more ums and ahs and more long pauses as I wait for noisy trucks to go by. But, I mean, that's only a 15-minute podcast. Anyway, I've got the editing process down enough that I don't think it's respectful to you to just ramble. I also feel like the schedule that I'm keeping right now obligates me to put out content when I don't know that there's necessarily content to put out. And so, like a bad game designer, or like most game designers, I was adding features to the podcast to fix that bug. So the analogy is like you're playing a game and you have a problem with, let's say, player downtime. There's a lot of downtime between turns. So to fix that, you add a mechanism that gives players something to do during other people's turns, somehow. Like, for example, in King Forge, everybody gets to roll their dice on other people's turns, or something. Or, you know, you might have cards that can interrupt, that keeps you involved, or whatever. There's lots of different ways that people do that. So, if I think about this podcast as a kind of game I'm designing, if the bug I've discovered is that it's hard to come up with content for 3 episodes a week, then I experimented with a variety of solutions. One of the solutions is just not producing 3 episodes a week, which is a fine way to do it. Another option was to come up with a schedule for regular episodes. I have my top of the stack. I had my games I've been playing, Q&A segment, state of the podcast, which was supposed to happen occasionally, and my hotness list. And while I feel like all of those have value, I'm not sure they have enough value to really make listening to the podcast worthwhile in the way that I'd like them to. So I've decided to take a new approach at the podcast and aim at it in a couple different ways. One, I'm getting rid of those regular segments in favor of just doing them when I feel like. So I probably will still do top of the stack. I like reporting to you what I've been playing that way. And I may occasionally do a what I've been playing, but probably not. Probably instead, the shooting from the hip and message from the deep episodes will be the extent of the what I've been playing. Unless I hear from a lot of listeners that they really want an update occasionally or something. But I'm probably not going to do that as much. I also have found that the episodes I find most exciting or interesting are the one to make. I don't care about what you think of them. That's not true. But the ones I found most exciting or interesting to make are ones where I get a buzz of excitement from a conversation somewhere, or an article I've read, or some bit of thing happening, a sort of commentary. If you think about people making response videos on YouTube or something, or writing about the issue of the day, that sort of topic I find much more interesting. So like when the guy who makes art for Scythe was sort of accused of being a copier, then talking a little bit about that. I found that a really interesting thing to make an episode about, or even just when I decided to do the board game sommelier about horror and talk about horror text. As one viewer in a comment, or one listener in a comment, said that it felt like I was letting my professor flag fly there a little bit. And it's true, I was, but I also found that really fulfilling, and I felt like that was offering something that isn't otherwise available in the marketplace, at least not as much. Because they talk about when you're making a thing, you should either be first or best. And I certainly have no claims at being best. If nothing else, my gimmick prevents this podcast from being accessible to a lot of people. The sound quality is mediocre at best. I'm kind of rambly. I don't do heavy editing. So there's some people who just don't want to listen to this. And so when you think about first, what is it I'm first doing? Well, one, this kind of off-the-cuff style is not particularly new, although I don't know of anyone else who has the idea that they're doing it while they're walking. They mentioned on the Forgot My Dice podcast that there's a Magic the Gathering designer who records a podcast while he's driving. I would suggest there's a danger there in distracted attention, but whatever. But I think one of the things I do bring to the conversation that is a little different is this academic, scholarly mindset combined with a heavy dose of public scholarship, for lack of a better word, public intellectualism. The idea of talking to people about these sort of more complicated ideas, or ideas from philosophy or history or cultural studies or film studies, but kind of digesting them into smaller packets that make them easier to digest or easier to engage with. Now, there are certainly people who do that in the sphere of game studies. Ludology is a great example of that. But I don't see it that often in bringing the tools of cultural studies or of history to board games. There are some people who do it a little bit. My favorite is Nick Mariner, but he doesn't produce regular content that way. His segments from Perfect Information were incredible, and I always like when he's on board games. But so I guess that I see that as a unique thing that I bring, or unusual. So what does all this mean? Two things. One, in my general experience, December and January are very rough months for anything I'm doing that's not mission critical. December is a month of family celebrations and travel. In January, I teach a course on zombies that meets 5 days a week for 6 hours every day. So it's basically all zombies all day. And I have very little energy or time to do anything that isn't all zombies all day. So in that regard, January is always a time when anything I'm doing that's ongoing gets interrupted. Last time I was playing Netrunner regularly, I stopped in January, and that's when I stopped, and I never picked it up again. My podcast always gets interrupted in January, the other one that I used to do every 2 weeks. So with that in mind, I mean, I do have more flexibility now because I record this while I'm walking. I don't need to carve out 3 hours to work on the podcast. At the same time, just knowing myself, there's a decent chance January will mark a significant pause moment for me. So with that in mind, I'm just going to lay it out there as a thing that I won't publish this podcast regularly in January. I may still do a few more episodes here in December. I will try to post a end of the year episode, even if I've kind of run out of steam. So let's say I publish a couple episodes here in the first part of December. I might not publish anything for a couple of weeks, but I'll try to get one online for the end of the year. And then I'll officially end season 1. We'll take a break, and I will come back in February with season 2. So I guess all of this is sort of leading up to, if you notice that this podcast stops publishing, I'd appreciate if you left me in your feed. I'll come back. If nothing else, I'll come back to say I'm not coming back. If I decide I'm going to be done with it, I'll come back enough to say, hey, I've decided not to pursue this project anymore. But right now, I think I will. I enjoy the process of it. And so thinking through the bugs, getting back to my original analogy, for me, the bug of it is the need for content. I set a pace for myself 2 or 3 times a week that is easy to maintain schedule-wise, but sometimes difficult to maintain in terms of relevance. And adding those regular segments that I felt, I got to remember to do that one this week, that sort of thing, was a good step for having content to do if I'm producing 2 or 3 podcasts a week. I think it was adding a mechanism to solve a problem that needed solving by removing something. So like I said, going back to the analogy at the beginning of the episode, in board game design, often if you discover a problem, the first instinct is to add another mechanism to solve that problem, when most of the time the right solution is to cut something to solve the problem. For instance, a lot of games, to cut player downtime, reduce the size of a turn. On a turn, you're doing 1 or 2 small things instead of a bigger thing. And because it's 1 or 2 small things, the turns move around faster. I think the epitome of this kind of precision is Century Spice Road, where you do one thing on a turn. There's 4 things you can do. You do one of them, it's the next person's turn. By the time you're done rearranging your cards and thinking about your move, it's your turn again. Sometimes it's your turn before you're done. And that kind of precision in game design really allows for a fun experience that you keep engaged the whole time because there's never downtime or very little downtime. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here. So the long and short of it is, I intend to keep Pick Up and Deliver going at least through the end of December. I'm going to take a hiatus in January, although I may record some episodes in January and just bank them. And then, but starting now, I'm relieving myself of the schedule obligation. So Pick Up and Deliver will, I'm afraid, no longer deliver on a schedule. Instead, it will deliver, I'm going to use the Rich Summer model of doing an episode when I feel like doing an episode. My hope is that by relieving myself of the burden of publishing on a schedule, I also relieve you of mediocre episodes. That I'm really not going to record an episode until I feel like I have something worthwhile to say. And in doing so, hopefully, the value of this podcast to you as a listener will go up. Now, I still will include a couple episodes a month, probably, that are more personal in discussion. So I love doing Top of the Stack, so I will continue to do a Top of the Stack episode each month. And I probably will do a couple other, I might occasionally just do a What I've Been Playing episode or a wish list update. But I'm not going to make myself obligated to do those monthly. And I'm not going to try to come up with content when it doesn't bubble to the surface naturally. What this means for the quality of the podcast, we'll have to wait and see. I'm interested to hear from you listeners, both about what's worked for you so far, what makes you listen or not listen. I feel like there's a burden when I produce 3 episodes a week that it gets overwhelming. Although they're so short, my guess is you just wait a week or 2 and then binge all of them in less time than it takes to listen to 1 episode of The Secret Cabal. So I'm just, as with any long ongoing project, thinking about how to make it better, how to make it more worthwhile for you. In that regard, I certainly would enjoy hearing comments from you in the Pick Up and Deliver forum on BoardGameGeek. Guild 3269 is where we chat. If you have questions, I'm interested in. I've discovered that, at least in the few times I did the Q&A episodes, often a question gives me a full episode. So a question you might have could lead to a full episode. I'm also, in particular, I'd be interested in any questions you have for the board game sommelier as you think about what kinds of games I would introduce for different kinds of experiences as an accompaniment to an experience. I'd be intrigued to talk with you about that. Well, I've got a minute or two left here before I reach my home, so I will share that over Thanksgiving, I had a lot of fun playing games, played a lot of party games, Werewords and Werewolf particularly a lot. Played some Santo Domingo, played quite a bit of The Mind, and a little bit of Sagrada. So that was, over vacation, it was fun. My son was disappointed. I had brought along my print and play version of Secret Voldemort, but we ran out of time to play it, so we did not get to play it, and he was disappointed in me that we didn't do that. So that was a bit of a bummer, but by the time we'd played Werewords, people were kind of tired of social deduction games, which I'm not. It's interesting. I don't know that he really likes them that much, but he always wants to play them. But then I don't think he has a good time. I don't know. We'll see. So, thanks for hanging on and continuing to listen. If this was your first listen to the show, I imagine it's kind of a weird one. Check out some of the back catalog. A couple episodes ago, I did a top 10 episodes of the show so far. I would recommend that as a starting place to see what kinds of stuff we're doing here on Pick Up and Deliver and whether it suits your interest as a connoisseur of delightful podcasts. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you online and talking to you next time. Until then, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.